Okay, good evening everyone. And so let's just get started and see what happens this evening. So here we go. All right, dear Bhante, could you kindly expand on Vidya Charana Sampanno, the 8 knowledges and the 15 conducts, with much gratitude and for your compassionate teachings. Okay, so this is the traditional way of understanding this. 8 knowledges and 15 conducts. I can't remember what they are, to be honest with you. I think the 15 conducts are mentioned maybe once in the Nikayas or something like that, or not, maybe not even there. But I can't remember exactly what they are. The 8 knowledges, well, these are kind of the 8 vidyas that you find occasionally in the suttas, like the Mahasakkaludaya Sutta. So these are like abhinyas, probably, usually. Things like the supernormal powers and seeing the mind-made body and these kind of things. Is it worthwhile talking about all of those? I don't know. Not sure if it is, because they're all, about things that to me is a bit on the side of what it's about. To me, it is the 3 knowledges that are really important. The understanding of the seeing of rebirth, the seeing of kamma, the seeing of awakening. These are the 3 things that really matter. And some of these other knowledges are kind of byproducts or, interesting at best, but not really fundamental to the spiritual life. And the 15 kind of charanas, I can't remember what they are, so I can't really talk about those. But I think the basic idea is that the Buddha's conduct is sort of impeccable. There's one nice sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya called the Brahmayu Sutta, where this Brahmin called Brahmayu, or his student, follows after the Buddha and observes the Buddha and sees his conduct. And he has all of these little details about how the Buddha behaves, and he walks at just the right speed, not too fast, not too slow. He turns around in the right way. All of these little details. You would expect a person who is an arahant to, because they're mindful all the time, it's like they know what they're doing. Everything is purposeful. There's no random kind of weird movements, so all that kind of stuff. Everything is kind of falls into line with the idea of being, being mindful all the time. And so you are, all your everything you do is done for a reason and for a purpose, because you know what you're doing. So that is what matters to me. What matters to me is that their conduct is aligned with the fact that they don't have any defilements. So they're acting as someone who doesn't have any defilements, and that should show in their conduct. These are the things that are really important as far as conduct is concerned, and that is what matters. So I apologize for whoever asked that question. I'm not really going to give you the full answer, but I hope you will be not too disappointed. I would recommend you to, if you want to read about those in detail, just look it up on the internet. If you put in 15 charanas, I'm sure it will come up straight away. You get it. It's there to be seen. All right, I'm going to carry on. Dear Ajahn, would it be correct to say a relationship is equal to the sum total of proliferations times time? If yes, could you please speak to this a bit? Thank you kindly. Okay, is that what it is? Proliferations times sum total of proliferations. I think proliferations are more than just a relationship. Proliferations happens in all areas of life. Sure, it happens in a relationship, but it's more than that. The sum total of relationship concerns yourself as well, concerns your sense of who you are as a person, also beyond the relationship. It concerns your views in all kinds of areas of life. It concerns all kinds of craving, not just the craving in relationship to relationships, but any kind of craving. So proliferation is very broad, and it's more than just whatever relationship you are in, happen to be in. It's very, very broad. But yes, a relationship will preoccupy the mind a lot. That is true. Especially in the beginning of a relationship, that's when they are the most interesting and kind of exciting, and your mind will kind of go over that relationship all the time. So in that case, it gets, it is closer to the truth. The first year or so, your mind kind of just goes... is very one-pointed on that relationship. It is not samma samadhi, by the way, that kind of one-pointedness. So so there's you are kind of you're making a good point, that this is kind of this is kind of how it is with relationships. Relationships are many things, and if you're going to be in a relationship, and if you live lay life, it is natural to be in a relationship. You don't have to be. Some lay people live quite happily by themselves, and that's wonderful. But also, if you're going to live in a relationship, no problem. Just make it a good one. Make it one where you foster the growth in the Dhamma. If you live with someone who has similar values as you have, then you can maybe help each other. We all need kalyanamitas, and make that partner you have a real kalyanamitta in your spiritual life, and then it can be a positive force in your life. But relationships can also be very destructive if you choose the wrong person. So be very careful what you choose in that relationship. And then it can become something positive. So I think it's wrong just because you're a monastic to denounce all relationships. I think that's kind of a stupid way of thinking about life. But find a good one, something that works, something that has a positive effect on you. Sometimes living by yourself, people are not made to be able to do that. Some people find it really, really hard to always be by oneself, and they need some sort of support. In that case, find a good supporter, and then you'll be hopefully be heading in the right direction. All right. Okay, so dear Ajahn, could you please talk a little bit about gratification, danger, and escape in the context of the 5 khandas? What is the gratification when the experience is not pleasure or happiness? That is a miserable experience. Thank you. What is the gratification when it is a miserable experience? That's the danger, right? That's not the gratification, that's precisely the danger, if it is a miserable experience. So gratification, danger, and escape, it is usually more large scale. A single experience is usually either gratifying or miserable, or dangerous, or maybe an escape. So individual experience, because that's like an individual feeling, if you like, an individual event. If you kind of bring it down to an individual event, it's either one or the other. But it's more like large-scale things. So if you think about, like a relationship, just talking about relationships before, there is the gratification there. Most people understand what that is. There is the danger. Obviously lots of dangers in relationships. I don't think I even have to mention that to you. But the most obvious one that people usually forget is that the relationship will end. And if it is a bad relationship, then it's fine. If it's a good relationship, it's dukkha when it comes to an end. So it is always kind of tends to be difficult regardless. And so this is so all experiences in life can be divided into these 3 categories, or everything in life can be divided into these 3 categories: the danger, the escape, and the gratification. So the 5 sense realm, you can see it in total through this particular lens. Everything in the 5 sense realm. In the gratification, we know what it is. It's when we enjoy things, and the danger is always when it comes to an end. When you're attached to something, and then it slips between your fingers, and you can't hold on to it. That's always the danger. And as long as you have craving, as long as you have desires, as long as you enjoy yourself in that 5 sense realm, you will attach, you will grasp, you will hold on. It is impossible to crave without grasping, possible to crave without attaching. This is just the way it works. And you can't avoid that. So it's always going to be difficulties in that area, always. So then, after a while, having seen the danger, having seen the gratification, you seek for the escape, the way out. You no longer understand that it is problematic, and so you look to the escape, which basically is the Noble Eightfold Path. That's where you find the way out of this. So that's kind of a broad view of things, and then you can kind of pare it down to the to the various. You can pare it down to the 5 khandas if you want. So in the 5 khandas, if you want to, as you're suggesting here, if you start with the body, for example, the gratification is you kind of, is whatever you like about yourself, I suppose. Whatever you like about your body, that is kind of the gratification. Maybe the pleasure that you experience through the body and these kind of things. Downside is when the body changes. You look at yourself in the mirror and think, oh no, I'm getting older. The body is breaking apart. The body is not doing what I want it to do. You knew that all along, but still you get disappointed when it happens. It's true, isn't it? We sort of know these things, but then we get disappointed when it happens. We don't really know it. That's the problem. We haven't really internalized it. We'll come to these things later on. And of course, ultimately, the body really lets you down by dying. And it doesn't matter how much you say, please body, don't die, it still will die. You cannot control the body. The body is out of control. It's not going to do what you want. The body is dangerous. This is the adinava, the downside of the body here. Then the escape is not attaching to the body, not being concerned about it, just allowing it to go its own way here. Feelings, similar kind of thing. The gratification is the good feelings. When those good feelings disappear, turn into bad feelings, that's the downside. And the escape is giving up the attachment to those feelings and just allowing them to come and go, just observing them arising and passing away here. Perceptions, you perceive someone as your friend, and then they turn out not to be all that reliable. An unreliable friend is barely a friend. You see the downside of that person, of that attachment you had to that friendship. That was a perception of friendship. And so your perceptions are, they change and they cannot hold on to them, and things alter. Sankharas is the gratification, is you feel alive when you do things. Yay, me, I'm doing, I'm creating, I'm making, I'm the artist, I am the, do all kind of wonderful things in the world. The gratification is from being the doer. And then when you become peaceful in the meditation, you see all the dukkha of all the doing. So you see the downside of the doing, and then one day you realize, okay, I better go for the escape. You stop attaching to the doing. You don't identify as the doer anymore, and when you don't identify as the doer, then the path into the deep samadhi opens up to you very easily. And in the last khanda, the consciousness, consciousness basically means being aware in the world, knowing, you kind of know all kind of things, you are aware of wonderful things, so knowing, just being aware. Wow, nice to be aware in the jhanas. There's just awareness left. And then you realize, actually, that awareness in the jhanas, that too, I can't really control it. It is out of control. I will lose it. And so you see the downside of holding on to those jhana states themselves. Even that you cannot identify with it. And so you look for the escape beyond, even in the case of these jhana states. So this is some idea for the 5 khandas, but the 5 khandas include everything really, and you can use this triad of aspects of life. You can use them in various, almost for anything, and analyze your existence in that way, and then that can help you to go beyond. This is a standard set found in the sutras, by the way. Gratification, asada, danger, adinava, escape, nissarana. Okay, so let's carry on now. Dear Ajahn, so first of all, I looked up those 5 panchadhammas yesterday, couldn't find them anywhere, so I don't know where they come from. Maybe someone made them up, but they are nice.
It's not part of the Buddhist studies in our Thailand curriculum.
Right, you mentioned it. Right, Yeah, but usually they come from somewhere, right? So someone has made it up or something. Yeah. Someone has kind of created it.
The thing is, I
Yeah.
haven't heard much about that,
Okay.
but I was impressed with it because
Yeah.
you just don't tell me what not to do.
Yeah.
Tell me what to do
Right.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So and the teachers was good.
Mm.
They emphasized on
Mm.
doing Dhamma as well. Panchadhamma.
Yeah, I thought they were. I agree with you. I thought they were nice because they were like the opposites of the precepts. Yeah, so that was kind of nice. But usually these kind of ideas they usually have some kind of source, sub-commentary or commentary or something like that. I couldn't find the source anyway. No source. Yeah. So maybe some smart teacher in Thailand who came up with this five.
It's from the Ministry of Education.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe they have some good people then in the Ministry of Education.
They did.
Yeah. They did in the old days.
Have politicians
Yeah.
coming and say
Yeah.
change.
Okay. Yes. Anyway, so I just wanted to make the point that I did look it up, but I couldn't find anything of particular interest. So, okay, dear Ajahn, Majjhima Nikaya 48 talks about joy connected with the teaching here. Is this the same as Dhammapiti here? I think it's Dhammapamujja. Yeah, I think it's Dhammapamujja, which is the joy there. But I mean, these things are not that clearly separated. So either way, is it possible for a non-noble person to experience Dhammapiti? Of course it is possible. This is the whole, this is kind of the point. The point is that sutta is spoken about noble people, but noble people have access to these things easily. That is the difference. But for others, it is not so simple. So we need to put more effort into actually having the same experience. And it is available to everybody. Yeah. So in other suttas, in this particular case, it is spoken to Mahanama and spoken about noble people. I think there's suttas in the Anguttara 11s, Nandya Sutta or something like that, where it is given same teaching given to Nandya, who is not a noble person, it seems. And there's a slight change there. Instead of Sangha, it talks about Kalyanamitta, I think, in that case. So it's a slightly different way of looking at things. But essentially the same things, yeah? Well, you know that, yeah? You just do something nice and you feel good about it. Yeah, there you are, Dhammapiti. Yeah, that's kind of Dhammapiti right away. Yeah. Okay. Wow, okay. Okay, at least nothing on the reverse side. That's good, because it's long enough as it is. Dear Ajahn, the most wonderful thing I know about Norway, gee, okay, is that it is your country of birth. An exceptional distinction to Norway. All right. That being said, my question is not directly related to Dhamma. I seek forgiveness in advance if it falls outside appropriate boundaries. My inquiry concerns the political meddling of powerful and influential nations in affairs of not so powerful others. Those countries often act as problem solvers in those in distress. For example, Scandinavian nations frequently and voluntarily get involved in the internal conflicts of other countries. Do these wealthy nations generally believe they are omnipotent, or is this a calculated strategy, a form of cheap investment to secure voters from vulnerable migrants and refugees? It is puzzling how such societies shaped by their unique circumstances can behave so blatantly, seemingly without given the societies are conditioned by their circumstances, what drive this pattern of behavior? I think you are probably asking the wrong person for this question, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. I suspect if you asked a Norwegian politician or anyone who kind of does this thing, they probably say that they, do it in the best interest of whoever. That's probably what they would say. Are there kind of side issues? Are there vested interests on the side? Probably. There usually is. Life is often complicated. But I don't know. Sometimes, I don't know if I want to get into this. It's always dangerous to kind of comment too much on politics because there's going to be, politics often is no solution. And often you will see things differently because you're coming from a different background, a different angle. I know a lot about Norwegian society, but I don't know so much about those societies where they try to maybe, where they get involved or whatever. And so it's hard for me it's very difficult, and chances that we will misunderstand each other are extremely high, almost guaranteed. And so I think if we want to kind of fall out, then I will do my greatest to answer this question in great detail from my perspective, and then probably we will remain enemies for the rest of our lives because of that. Maybe. I don't know what will happen. So, so I don't really know the answer. And I think politics is usually best left to one side, especially kind of, there's always politics. Everything is politics at the end of the day. And so you get into enough politics already. But we should focus on those real dilemmas, moral dilemmas in the world when we discuss politics in the Buddhist context. Things that actually relate to people. Things like climate change, to me, is a moral question, and I think we should discuss that as monastics. Things like abortion are obviously kind of, moral choices, and that these are things that we should discuss and we should talk about and, find a kind of reasonable Buddhist answer to these questions. Even wars, I think, are things that are moral things. This kind of question here, I think, is very ambiguous and very hard to really pin down any kind of clear moral teachings. The moral teaching should always be, we do our best to help others, and if we don't do our best, then it's bad. So the question then is Norway doing its best or is not doing its best? I don't know the answer to that. But if Norway or any country were to get involved in another country, the right way to do it is to do their best to help. And sometimes maybe they can be helpful, right? There's lots of transfer, for example, financial transfer going on between nations. And I was recently, not last year, I was in Poland, and Poland has been the beneficiary of large transfers from Europe to build up the infrastructure. And the highways in Poland, much better than the highways in Norway. Much better, even though Norway is supposedly a much more wealthy country, because it has been built up by the funds from Western Europe. And they are very, they're obviously happy about that. So, is that getting, involved in the internal politics of another country? Is it not? My point is that there are different ways of doing it, I suppose. So I hope they do their best to do the right thing. And if they don't, well, I don't know what to say about that. I'll go back and tell them off, I suppose. Okay, next question. Dear Ajahn, thank you so much for your inspirational teaching. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Today you said the Dhamma would be found in the 4 Nikayas. I thought that there were 5 Nikayas. Does that mean that the Khuddaka Nikaya is not that important? What is the place of the Dhammapada? Thank you. Yes, the Khuddaka Nikaya is less important. The Khuddaka Nikaya actually means the small Nikaya, the small collection, but it is by far the largest of the collections. And that tells you something about the paradox. It probably started out quite small. It started out with a few of those things that we have today, and the most oldest part of the Khuddaka Nikaya would be things like, you say, the Dhammapada, the Udana, the Itivuttaka, Sutta Nipata, or at least parts of the Sutta Nipata, Gata, Gata. That's roughly probably the core aspect of the Sutta of the Khuddaka Nikaya. And that is actually quite small. It doesn't amount to very much, because these are all very small books. And that then the name matches. But if you start adding all of the other stuff, if you add just the Jatakas, Jatakas are bigger than any other Nikaya, just on its own. And then you go to all of these other aspects of the Khuddaka Nikaya, Patisambhidamagga, Buddha Vangsa, Charyapitika, Nidesa, all of these things. And these things are obviously not the same age. They don't belong to the Dhamma in the same way as the four other Nikayas. These are obviously later. The language is completely different. The Nidesas are actually commentaries on other suttas. Yeah. So because they are commentaries, obviously they belong to a different era and a different kind of have a different style and everything. Yeah. So so this is very clear from a kind of literary standpoint that these things are not the same. They don't have the same value. They don't come from the Buddha. It's very, very obvious. And so, yes, we need to make that distinction. The Dhammapada, take that book, for example. It is a compilation, and some of those verses are very ancient. Some of the verses in Dhammapada also occur in the four Nikayas. Yeah, they are right there. Some of the verses probably not quite as ancient. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. In the Sanskrit version, they have something called the Udana Varga. And Udana Varga is roughly equivalent to the Dhammapada, except it's called Udana. So it's similar to the Pali Udana in name, but it has over 1,000 verses compared to the Dhammapada, which has 400 and something verses. So greatly expanded, many verses you don't find there. So these collections have kind of grown over time, have added things in over time. And so, what is the exact cutoff? And so, you use them. Generally speaking, they have the same flavor as the four main Nikayas. Generally speaking, it's really good Dhamma, but occasionally you may come across things that are a little bit, on the side or whatever. There's been some nice studies. There was a nice study done by Venerable Analayo, where he did a comparative study of the Udana. And his comparative study of the Udana, he showed that the oldest part of the Udana are the verses and not the stories around them. Yeah, so because those verses exist also in the Chinese translation, in the kind of Chinese Buddhist canon, and so they are there. And this is kind of a general idea. In the Pali, you can see, for example, that the Dhammapada also has stories, but they are in the commentaries in the Pali. The commentarial are the famous Dhammapada stories, whereas for the Udana, the stories have been incorporated to create suttas. So there's kind of various ways of combining prose and verse, etc., in these in the Khuddaka Nikaya. So yes, the fifth Nikaya is less important than the other ones, and it incurs a lot of what you would call heterodox text, various kinds of texts, of a variety of differences. Okay, dear Ajahn, you've talked about the characteristics of a stream winner. What are the characteristics of a person who is on the path to become a stream winner? The sotapati pala patipanno pugalo. So the characteristics of that person, as they are described in the suttas, is that they are incapable of taking any sankhara as permanent, or as sukha, or as a self. Yeah. So if you tell them something, this sankhara is that impermanent, or they will say impermanent. So any particular sankhara they cannot see as permanent, as happiness or self. But they haven't yet come to the conclusion that sabbe sankhara, all sankharas, are impermanent, are suffering, and are non-self. Yeah, so if you talk about specific sankharas, they understand, but they haven't yet come to the conclusion that all sankharas are under this fall in the same way. That is the distinction between the two. So it's similar, but not exactly the same. Yeah? So if you ask someone who is on the path, you ask them, well, is the body impermanent or not? Or they say, oh, it's impermanent, you know that. What about perception? Oh, yeah, my perceptions are impermanent. But they haven't yet come to the conclusion that all perceptions, are impermanent. But the perception you have right now, this specific one, is impermanent, or any particular perception is impermanent. They haven't yet come to the universal conclusion that it's all marked by the three characteristics. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya somewhere here. can't remember exactly where it is. So that's how I understand the difference. And of course, you will have to become a stream mentor by the end of your life. Dear Ajahn, could you please explain a bit more about Loka vidu in the Itipiso Gata? Okay, so Loka vidu, the word vidu is from same word as vidyati, so it means to understand and to have insight. And Loka is the world, so you have insight into the world. And of course, usually when we talk about this in Buddhism, we talk about the world, 31 planes of existence, the various ways you can be reborn, the various stations of beings in the world. So you understand all of the places where you can be reborn, all potential kind of rebirths. And also you understand usually what leads to these various places, right? You understand that if you do this kind of kamma, it will lead to that kind of rebirth. And you also, I think, an important point is also, one of the kind of weird things about the idea of kamma, it sounds like it means you can control, right? If I make good kamma, then I will go there. It sounds like you are in charge of your rebirths. But that is another illusion, because in this life, if you're lucky enough to be a Buddhist, you know you have to do the right thing. Okay, maybe your next life will be a good one. That is just because you have been conditioned in a particular way. In the long run, your conditioning is going to be sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes in between. The point is that your conditioning is out of control. This is one of the aspects of non-self. You don't know how you're going to be conditioned in the future. You don't know what kind of kamma you will make. And so this 31 planes of existence is almost like a game of dice with 31 faces. 31-faced die. I don't know if that can be made even, but let's assume it can be. You roll the die, okay, and then you go to that realm. Actually, it is not even like that, because some of those faces are far more heavily weighed than the other ones. Most of those faces are tiny, 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 and the chances of landing on those faces is almost zero, whereas the chances of landing on some of the other ones are much, much greater. And so that is kind of the scary thing, is that there is all these worlds, and then there's the kamma that leads to them, and that kamma is ultimately out of control. You don't know what kind of kamma you're going to make. So the whole thing is very dicey and very uncertain. And so what that means, so all of these things is what you kind of know. But how can you summarize that? And the way to summarize that is really to think of it, well, all of these things, they are different levels of happiness and suffering. And so really understanding the world, if you talk about all of these levels of rebirth, it's kind of hard to relate to right now, because we don't know what these things really mean. But what we can relate to is happiness and suffering. And so really what all of these realms are about is various degrees of happiness and suffering. And so your happiness and suffering in the future is a roll of dice, and you don't know what's going to happen as you move through the samsaric existence, kind of like this yo-yo going up and down in various, sometimes really down, sometimes maybe higher up, and these kind of things. So that's why I said yesterday, it is a full understanding of the happiness and suffering in the world. That's what it really is about, because the various kinds of rebirth entail all the various kinds of suffering and happiness that are available in samsaric existence. Everything is there. Everything is impermanent, everything is uncertain, everything, the future always unreliable, etc. So something like that, and I'm sure you can explain this in many different ways as well, but there you are here. Dear Ajahn Brahmali, thank you for your teachings. Are there opportunities in Australia or other countries for senior persons to become monastics? Yes, it depends. It depends on the monastery. Monasteries have different policies, and so it depends where you go. It depends on how long the wait list is. Depends on all kind of things. At Bodhinyana Monastery, we don't actually have any limit on people to ordain. There's no upper limit, and so but that obviously only goes for males. For men, if you're a woman, you can't really ordain at Bodhinyana Monastery. You have to find some other place. So But there it is possible. The problem at Bodhinyana is that the wait list is sometimes quite long. If you are Australian, of course, that is very helpful because we have priority for Australians. But if you are a foreigner, well, it's really, really hard to get into Bodhinyana monastery. We had a very nice case recently. We had one fairly young man who from the UK. He has studied musicology at Oxford University, and I knew him a little bit. Very, very nice young man, very bright, half Japanese, half English. And he was really keen on ordaining at Bodhinyana Monastery. He consulted with me quite a bit about where to ordain. And I said, come to Bodhinyana. It's hard to find, any place much better than that. So come here. And so I repeated this, and he waited, I think, for 4 years before he could ordain. And he kind of worked at retreat centers and did all kind of things in those 4 years. And eventually he came to Bodhinyana Monastery, and eventually he got the chance to ordain. And now he's a monk with us. And during his ordination ceremony, he was just so emotional. He was kind of tears kind of coming down. He was barely able to do his chanting because it was so emotional. It was like this kind of release. Finally, I have made it. 4 years it took me to get to this point. It was such a touching ordination ceremony. It was the most remarkable thing I've been to ever in my 30 years as a monk. It was really, really powerful. And I was so happy that I encouraged him. Here is someone who really wants to do this. And finally he gets the opportunity. And now the sense of release when you have that chance. And so that is really nice. So so we should, this is one of the things, in my opinion, we should always try to give people the opportunity to ordain. It's such a beautiful thing to do. And I have kind of, I've always been in favor of expanding Bodhinyana Monastery to kind of give more people a chance, because the waiting list is so long. People are sitting there kind of waiting, and eventually they're ordained in some other place, which may not have the equally good teachings or facilities or whatever. I think Bodhinyana Monastery is a good place to go, and so that's why I would encourage people to come there. But anyway, so for men it is easier. Bodhinyana Monastery is available. For women, a bit more difficult, because I think the Dhammasara Monastery anyway has age restrictions. What about Santi Monastery? You haven't spoken about it yet, so it depends. So it's uncertain. So it is kind of we don't know what's going to happen. So go to Venerable Karunika before they speak about it. Once it's spoken about, it might be too late. No, I can understand why they have limits, because even for us at Bodhinyana Monastery, we have some very old monks now, and they have to be looked after. They have to, and they don't want to kind of go into some old age home. They want to die in the monastery for obvious reasons. You can see why, and so you have to look after them. You have to have facilities, and then you have to support them. And it can, if you have too many old people, obviously can become a burden. So you have to find some kind of balance there at least. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Okay, dear Ajahn, does the relinking consciousness also consist of 6 consciousness corresponding to the 6 sense bases? Thank you. This is the Patisandhi Vijnana. And I am no expert. This is kind of really Abhidhamma terminology, and I'm absolutely no expert on Abhidhamma, and to be honest, quite happily so. But I think the Patisandhi Vijnana is likely to be a mind consciousness. It is the mind which has that relinking ability, and not the other 5 senses. That's what I would think. Remember, it's only one moment. You go from the Chuti Chitta, which is the last mind moment in the previous life, to the Patisandhi Vijnana, which links you directly to the next life. It's only one mind moment, so it cannot be all 6 senses. It can only be one sense, because in one moment there can only be one sense at the time. And so I would think, logically speaking, that it would be the mind sense that is what links from one life to the next one, I would think. But in any case, I think the whole thing is really a red herring, because I don't think that's how rebirth works. That is how rebirth is according to the Abhidhamma, but actual rebirth is not like that. It is quite clear to me that in the sutras there is an antarabhava, there is an intermediate state, and it doesn't work. Chuti chitta patisandhi vijnana. There is no real chuti chitta. Death, dying itself is like a process. At what point you die, I mean, you can't really pinpoint it, I think. So there is this process going on. Then you go into the antrabhava state, like people who have a near-death experience. You hang out there for a while, and maybe you remember your life. You come to a judgment about how you lived your life. And then when you come to that judgment, then you send yourself off automatically to some kind of new destination, depending on that judgment. That's really how it works. There's many, many indications in the sutras that there is such an intermediate existence before you actually get reborn. And this is one of the places where I think the orthodox Theravadan view is actually wrong. It has misunderstood. There are other schools of Buddhism where they did have an idea of antrabhava, but not the kind of orthodox Theravadan position. And these are the things that are discussed in the Katavatu. Katavatu is the points of discussion. It's one of the 7 books of the Abhidhamma, where they discuss the viewpoints of different schools of Buddhism. And the Theravadins, because it is a Theravada book, the Theravadan view is almost held out as the right one, and it shows how these other views are wrong. That's where it argues against the antrabhava view of other schools. But in this case, I think the other schools were probably right, and they got, understood what the Buddha was talking about. So the whole thing, I think, is like a red herring. It's not really how the Buddha's taught in the first place. Yes. Yeah. No, in that case it would be many senses. In the antrabhava you have all sense because it goes on for a long time. So there you see things, hear things. Just like you see in the near-death experience, people have all kind of experiences of sight and everything. Yeah. The ghost realm is more than antrabhava. So people, it is probably similar to a ghost realm. But I don't know if it is a ghost realm, because ghost realm implies quite a lot of suffering here. I don't think there is necessarily any suffering in the antrabhava. There is sufferings everywhere, but it's not the kind of suffering that you have in the ghost realm. But the form that you have would maybe be a little bit like a ghost, in the sense that it is kind of mind-made or something like that. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Normally it would be short-lived. Sometimes I think the thing is that I think one of the reasons why it's not talked about in the sutras is that it is not given that it will happen. So, for example, if you have very strong kamma, then you may actually go straight to Brahma Loka or whatever, bang, because you go into a jhana, you go straight there. There's no antrabhava. So sometimes there is no antrabhava, but for most beings, I think there will be an antrabhava to kind of mature the kamma and then kind of send you wherever you belong. Yeah. Short holding pattern, like the plane kind of is going round before it lands. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Like it's said that it's like the process of death and reborn into the afterlife. It's like you have built a new house and now you're moving from your old one. But you start going slowly, like you start pot plants, you might do this, one night you might stay in the new house and stay in the other one, and eventually
But I think that's a slightly different one. I think that is more to do with when consciousness arises in the embryo, and how then that consciousness attaches to the embryo over time. I think that's when you are reborn already. When you're in embryo. I think that's what he was referring to. The attachment of once you have been reborn, then the reattachment in that new life happens in the same way as you move into a house. So it's a bit like you can talk about this relates to the kamma of abortion, for example, right? How strongly attached is that consciousness to that new home, so to speak, and those kind of things. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned
Yeah,
this, can
yeah.
you please talk more about abortion and consciousness in the fetus?
Yeah. So this is a very difficult area, because I don't think it's not exactly clear anywhere exactly what is going on. So the question is, first of all, the question is, at what time does consciousness arise in an embryo? Does it arise straight away at conception, or later on? And I don't know, the answer is very unclear. Yeah, there's no clear answer, but a lot of the anecdotal evidence that you hear suggests that it can arise at different times. Yeah. And if there is no consciousness in the embryo, if it's just part of the mother's body, there's no separate consciousness, then obviously there is no bad kamma, because it's not killing anything. It has to have consciousness to be able to experience pain and to be killed. And so in that case, there is no bad kamma. But if the consciousness has arisen, well, that is when you're starting to kill something here. Yeah? This is point number one to remember. Yeah? Is there consciousness there or not? And if we can be certain that there is no consciousness, there would be no issue. And so the earlier you have an abortion, if you have one, the earlier it is, the more likely it is to be no issue with that abortion. The second thing is that this is where the simile of moving into the house comes in, right? How attached are you to this kind of new existence of yours? And also the size of the being matters. Yeah, it's very different to kill an elephant to killing a mosquito is a very different thing. Yeah, it is because its ability to experience the world or whatever will be very different. And so again, based on size and based on its how kind of moved in it has to its new home, its new house or whatever, all of those things will also affect the kamma that you make. Yeah. So again, the earlier it is, the less kamma is going to be involved. So all of these things just shows you. Of course, if it is very late in the pregnancy, there comes a point when it starts to look like a baby, right? And at that point, obviously, it's going to be worse. Yeah, it's just a continuum. I mean, what about the baby just before it's born? Well, that's pretty much the same as after it's born. So, does that mean it's okay to kill a small baby? That's kind of... So the whole thing is just a continuum. So the earlier, the better, basically. Also, it depends on why you are having abortion. There are many reasons. Yeah, if you are really angry with this embryo because it came into your life at the wrong time and you hate it or whatever, it's obviously bad. Yeah, if you kill something out of hate, it's really a negative thing. But if you consider all things and it's just too difficult and this is going to be really hard to bring up this baby because you haven't got the resources or whatever, and after weighing things up properly, you decide, that as best you can make up your mind this is not a good idea, it's going to be much less bad kamma because you're coming from a place of reason rather than coming from a place of just some emotional reaction. Yeah. So all of these things matter. So you have to do it early, do it with wisdom, ask yourself, okay, what is the right approach here? And then you can minimize the negative outcome. Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. And what is interesting, however, is that that exactly same passage is also found in which sutta is that again? One of the suttas, Asalayana Sutta, maybe, yeah, one of those. And there it is said to be a view of the Brahmins. So that seems to be a Brahmanic, a pre-existing view, and not actually a Buddhist view, which has kind of made its way into the Mahatana Sankaya Sutta. And so I don't know if that actually is a real Buddhist view, or whether it actually comes from the Brahmanical background or the social background at the time. Could be, yeah, maybe, yeah. So I don't know. So this is kind of the interesting thing. And so these things are, I think, subject to research as well. And you can research these things to find out. And so there's a lot of potential there for understanding this better. Okay. So next one. Dear Ajahn, Sometimes I can feel the breath and see thoughts at the same time. Breath at times becomes mechanical, coming and going continuously in the background. How to prevent breath from becoming mechanical? Okay, so so the breath is kind of there, but you are more interested in the thoughts or whatever. And this, this is in many ways quite natural. So what you have to do is you have to do the opposite. Allow the thoughts to be in the background and the breath in the foreground. And so the way to do that is to be more interested in the breath than in the thoughts. To understand that the thoughts, they come and go. There's no end to them. There is no final solution in that realm. Actually, not all that interesting after all. You think they're interesting, but you have to reduce your interest in them to see that, actually, let me first create a clear mind. And then when I have a clear, really clear mind, then maybe I can think something. Then maybe my thoughts will be more useful. Instead of going in endless loops and doing stupid things, then get some clarity about it. So de-emphasize the thoughts. Remember that these things are not that interesting. Whereas the breath is the vehicle to awakening. The breath often has lots of beautiful qualities to it. Feel the breath, feel the softness of the breath, feel the ease, feel the peace, the gentleness that comes with it. Feel sometimes the little bit of bliss that arises with the breath. See the beauty of the breath. See the beauty of peace. See the attractiveness of all of those things. And as you do, you will take less interest in the thoughts. So make the thoughts the main object. Make the breath the main object. And allow the thoughts to fade into the background. That's what you want to do. And then when the thoughts fade into the background, then you are on the right track. And later on, when the meditation goes really well, then maybe the nice feelings, they come into the foreground, and maybe the breath falls a little bit into the background. Then it is okay, because then you have like a higher thing that you are focusing on. But the thoughts are the lower thing, the breath is the higher thing. Okay, so, dear Ajahn, when causes and conditions come together, one can enter the jhanas or attain sotapanna. We can just walk the path, and not even that if we are not exposed to the Dhamma. So we can just walk the path, and not even that if we are not exposed to the Dhamma. Where is free will in this? Could you please elaborate more on whether we have choice or we don't have choice? Thank you. Where does free will? This is a very Western conception, the idea of free will. It doesn't really occur in the suttas, or the Buddha doesn't talk about it in that way. It comes out of the idea of Western philosophy. And the reason why it comes out of Western philosophy is because it has a lot to do with explaining how Christianity can work as a religion. That's really where it comes from. So the idea is, one of the things is that, well, God created us, so how come we suffer? Well, it's because we make stupid choices, and that comes from free will. Something like that is the idea, because otherwise it's very difficult to explain suffering. If God is completely benevolent and he creates us and says, now, but you are going to suffer, it is like God is evil, right? He creates suffering in the world. And that's kind of not really acceptable, because God is good. And so God gives us this free will so we can make stupid choices, and then we can suffer. That's kind of the idea. That's where a lot of this kind of idea of free will comes from. But is there really any free will? Well, there is a different way of thinking about free will, and this is the Buddhist way of thinking about free will. And this is as follows. So in our ordinary life, when we make choices, we cannot really make very good choices, because sometimes we don't even know where real happiness is. If you ask most people on the street in Sydney or in Perth or wherever in the world, especially outside the Buddhist world, and you ask them, and they don't even know about jhanas, they don't know about samadhi. So how can they make those choices if they don't even know about them? So is that free will? Yes, you still have, you can choose between, as I mentioned the other day, between an orange and an apple, but who cares? That's not the point. Yeah, you want to be able to. So our knowledge of the world, our understanding of the world, the lack of understanding, that is what hinders us in making us good choices. And so free will is the ability to make choices that are truly beneficial. And that means, first of all, having the Dhamma, so you can kind of get on the path and do something useful. Without the Dhamma, you are not going to make interesting choices anyway. So the free will is kind of really overrated in that case. It doesn't make any difference. And eventually, the real free will happens when the hindrances are gone. Because when the hindrances are gone, you can choose any kind of happiness. You can choose jhanas, you can choose awakening experiences, you can choose all of these things that actually have real happiness. And so free will is what comes out when the hindrances are gone. That is what blocks our ability to make good choices. That is the higher kind of free will. And to me, the only free will that is really worthy of its name. Because the other will is, even if it's free, which I don't think it is anyway. I don't think it is free. But even if it was free, you cannot really make any interesting choices. So what's the point? I'm not sure if I'm making any sense to anyone, but that is kind of how I... Yeah, so if it doesn't make any sense, please try again here. Yeah, that is kind of one of those very interesting things, yeah. And it means that without the Kalyanitta, there is no holy path. You cannot just choose the Eightfold Path if you don't know it exists. And that knowledge of existence comes from the Kalyanamitas, exactly. And that's why it is 100%, yeah, precisely. So it shows you the limitations of that. Okay, last questions for tonight. Dear Ajahn, I can forgive myself that what I did was due to cause and conditions. Why do I have to face kamma vipaka then? Well, the answer is that you can forgive yourself to some extent, but usually you cannot forgive yourself 100%. There will always be a residue left, and that residue is what the sense of self. It will take some degree of responsibility. If you could forgive yourself 100%, you would enter jhana straight away. Because there would be nothing there to hinder you anymore, yeah? It is a fact that you have some kind of regret, the mind is not entirely bright, that comes from the bad things that you have done in your life, so you cannot enter jhana straight away. So the very fact that you cannot enter jhanas at will means that you haven't been able to forgive yourself 100%. And that is the nature of the mind, because there is a sense of self. The sense of self, even though the self may not exist, it may be an illusion, that sense of self will still take responsibility here. Yeah, it's really unfair, but that's kind of how the world works. And then when you die, you go maybe to the intermediate existence, the antrabhava, you see your life review, and you see, oh no, I did that. And they say that the life review is a bit like a third person. Yeah, you are kind of standing back and watching yourself as if you're watching someone else. So if you watch someone else doing bad things, we can often be quite judgmental of other people. And now, because you're seeing yourself as a third person, if you are judgmental of others, you will now be judgmental of yourself in that antrabhava. This is a very good reason for not being judgmental in the world, because then you will judge yourself equally harshly after you die. Yeah, wow, I did that, that's evil, I'm bad. And then, wait a minute, I am bad. And then you kind of trapped yourself. And then you will send yourself off into a bad future as a result. So that's why you have to receive the kamma vipaka, because you cannot forgive yourself 100%. And then you will have this judgment time when you die, and then you will reap the results as a consequence. Yeah. Mm. So first of all, you have to forgive yourself, then you have to enter the jhanas, right? So you have to get the sequence right, first of all. Will you then have any kamma vipaka? You will not have any kamma vipaka in the next life, but you may still reap the results down the track, further down the track, if the residue may still be there in the mind to some extent. Yeah. So, but if you take it all the way to awakening, of course, then you will not have any kamma vipaka. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Between stream entry and arahantship. Yes, you can still have kamma vipaka at that time. Generally speaking, however, the stream entry will actually be able to forgive themselves to a large extent, because they know that there is no self, and so they have that insight. But it depends on the stream mentor and how they live their life. Some stream mentors will live their life very wisely, do a lot of meditation, enter the jhanas and become a jhananagami, and kind of bang, would be out of here. But then there may be other stream mentors who are have more responsibilities, are more negligent, and then they die, and they will not be reborn in quite such favorable situation, maybe as a human being or a devata or something like that. Okay. Any final questions, anyone? Everyone is okay? Everyone is good? Okay. Let's pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha then.